Welcome everyone to this episode of Trailblazing Leaders. This is now a second part of the conversation I was having with Sean Riches. If you didn't have a chance to listen to the first part, Sean Riches is the founder of Erskine and Nash in London. For 18 years, his company is focused on perfecting team performance. And in our first episode, we covered multiple topics around the skill set and tools he uses to create high performance teams. The conversation was so deep that in this second part of our conversation, we're now going to go a little deeper into very specific leadership models and methods. We're going to talk about the generational differences and the misnomers about leadership of these new generations. And we're going to also talk about the type of leadership styles and the agility required. So Sean, I want to welcome you back to this second part episode of the Trailblazing Leader podcast. And let's get right into our first question for this episode. Welcome back to part 2. And we had a great first conversation about clarity, alignment, and behavior, the importance of investing in leadership skills, why you need to work from the top down, but you can work with a team, how you train leaders to then be leaders of teams and cascade that knowledge by training trainers, etc. I think now I want to shift our conversation to trends and insights that you're seeing, because I think the workforce is having a dramatic shift. You and I both are working with a client where 25% of their workforce is going to be retiring in the next 5 years. And those are their most senior leaders, and they're not really fully prepared for what could happen and haven't been thinking about it. And succession planning is becoming such an important topic, and the new workforce has different values, or at least we think they have values. So why don't we start with the question about what workforce trends are you seeing that organizations need to be addressing?
So there's a lot of people to say that, one of the biggest changes or trends is one of generational change. And I think there's some validity to that argument, or I do think it's overblown as well.
Okay.
So for people will be aware of these terms, but let me clarify a few terms. So if you look at the generations, you've got the silent generation, and then the baby boomers, and then Gen X, and then Gen Y, known as millennials, then Gen Z. And actually, we're starting to see the next generation. I'm not sure what the naming of that is, maybe Gen Alpha. So although people have attempted to say, well, if you're born between this year and this year, that puts you in that generation. Actually, it's more about value systems. So you might be born outside of that, but have that value system, so it places you in that generation. But so baby boomers were born, during the Second World War, and after the Second World War, my parents would be baby boomers. They're born in the 1940s and 1950s, and that's true both in the UK and also in the US as well. And typically, they expected to go into a company, work for that company, maybe for their whole life, work for a few companies, but you quite dutiful, and you earned your pension, and you retired, and there you go. They're the baby boomers. Then you get Gen X's, and I'm probably a Gen Xer, so theoretically born from 1964 onwards, and we are thought to be quite cynical. We are the children of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, where corporates said, we're going to cut out all of these kind of nice to have things. We're all about the bottom line, and if you want loyalty, buy a Labrador kind of thing. And as a workforce, we went, well, if that's the game you're playing, we'll play it back again. So it's a far less sort of paternalistic kind of expectation than maybe my parents would have had. Then you get the millennials, which is also known as Gen Y. Now, I hear a lot of people talk about, millennials, they're young people. And it's like, no, millennials are now in their 40s. All right. A lot of them. So millennial means you came of age. So you were probably roughly between the ages of 15 and 30, 25, something like that, around the millennium, the year 2000. So that means you could have been born in 1980. Now, if you were born in 1980, at the time of recording, that probably means you're 40, 43, 40, 44, something like that. Yeah. So the millennials are not young people anymore, right? So Gen Xers like me, and people even older than me, need to stop talking about millennials as if they're young. They're not. Okay.
Yeah.
They are middle managers and occasionally even senior leaders in businesses now. They are supposed to, and of course this isn't true of everybody, but generally speaking, the concept is that they were brought up in a more liberal society where even as a child, as a young person, they had a voice, they expected to be heard, and they kind of banged the table a bit more than maybe we did. We had low expectations, they weren't met, and we just kind of shrugged our shoulders and got on with it.
Right.
The millennials, the Gen Ys, they kind of expect to be heard and have a voice even at a much younger age. And that, that's probably true for a lot of them. You then get your Gen Zs, who are clearly much younger, and they are entering the workforce now. A lot of them are in the workforce right now, so they're going to be in their 20s now. And they have grown up in a world that is fully digitized. They don't remember a time before the internet existed. They have mobile devices. They move from one thing to another. They claim to be great at multitasking. I'm not sure about that. And they want everything and they want it now. And they certainly don't, they're a long way away from my parents' generation. So they would be maybe changing jobs, doing multiple jobs, and end up doing jobs that weren't even invented when they joined the workforce. So it's a very much more fluid kind of situation. The Gen Alphas and my kids, are not going to be joining the workforce for another, let's say 5 to 10 years, probably. Who knows what they're going to be like. And maybe the pendulum is going to swing back again, actually, and they're going to be, these trends don't continue. As we know in society and in organizations, the pendulum swings forward. So just to kind of clarify terms, those tend to be broadly what people mean by this.
Okay.
And the problem is now that with people staying in the workforce until later, and certainly in the UK, the age at which the government will pay you a pension is going up. I think it's like 67 now. We've got people of that age in the workforce, and we've got people who are 21 leaving university, or maybe even not going to university. They're staying in education until 18. So we've got potentially 4 generations in the workforce with 4 apparently different value sets and requirements. Now,
what does
that
it mean?
That if
let's, this, I hear the 4 generations. This is now what do you see, and how does it impact teaming, and what do we do about all this mix?
Okay. So theoretically, and again, I am not sure this is true for everybody. Clearly it isn't. We're talking about tens, hundreds of millions of people. It can't be true for everyone, right? Stereotypes are a very dangerous game, but they come from somewhere. Okay. Yeah. We could have a boss who's certainly Gen X, in their 50s, late 50s, like me, trying to lead a team with a significant number of people in their 20s who have grown up in a very, very different world. And those values and requirements and demands can clash. So that's potentially the problem that we've got. I have to say, I think it's a little overblown. Okay. I mean, if you want to write a book about this or run a program about it, it's in your interest to make it that it's all really big changes, and I'm not sure that's true. So let me give you an example of why I think that might be. It is alleged that young people these days want everything immediately. They want to work for a emotionally intelligent, high EQ, nurturing leader who will look after them and develop them in the way that they were used to at school and maybe in their parenting, the parenting they received, because that was their expectation, and it carries over to work. They expect to be have a voice, to be asked for their opinion, even though they only joined the firm 3 months ago. They want the latest technology, and they want it for free because they're not used to paying for technology. So a lot of stuff online is free, as we know. And this sounds completely unreasonable, except if in 1990, when I joined the workforce, you'd have said to me, "Hey, Sean, do you want the latest technology?" Whatever that was then. I'd have gone, "Yeah, bring it on." "Do you want to pay for it?" "Hell no. If it's free, I'll have it." "Do you expect to work for an emotionally intelligent leader?" Well, I wasn't sure what emotional intelligence was, but it sounded good. Do you want someone who's going to look after you and nurture you and be interested in your career as well as what you're doing today for them? It's like, yeah, I do actually. Do you want everything now rather than waiting? Yeah, I mean, I'm used to waiting for stuff, but if I can have it now, bring it on. In other words, I'm not sure that the expectations are that different. The difference is that in 1990, no one bothered to ask me what
Yes.
my expectations were. It doesn't mean to say they weren't there. The difference is I didn't really expect it because I was a cynical old Gen Xer, even at the age of 21, 22, whatever it was back then, 23. So I didn't get it in my family. I didn't get it at university. I wasn't that shocked when I didn't get it at work. In other words, the expectations are not different. It's the expectation and the disappointment when it's not there. That's pretty much for me the biggest difference.
And I think what you hit upon and our colleague Matt Tenney speaks about is, and Gallup really comes from Gallup. Every human being has 12 to 14 core needs they want met in the workforce.
Yeah.
And for high engagement and retention, the highest core need is not the fundamentals. I have computers and materials and supplies, but it's I am valued by the organization. I'm valued by my manager, and I have assistance to develop my career to achieve my personal and professional goals and aspirations. Isn't that really, that's all everybody wants at any age to achieve their goals, aspirations, and dreams, because those what drive us as human beings, because it comes from Maslow's hierarchy of needs as human beings. It's our evolution. It's our deep neuroscience evolution that sits within every generation and every person.
Yeah. The only difference maybe is that organizations didn't typically feel a need to provide for that back in the day.
Correct.
Whereas now, if you want to attract and retain people of those younger groups, of those younger generations, you are being judged by them way more harshly than we did back in the 90s. And they will walk if they can, and a lot of them have a skill set. And if they're working in an economy like the US, which is pretty buoyant at the moment, or in the tech sector in the UK, which, even though our economy is not as good as yours generally, our tech sector is very good. If they've got good tech skills, they can walk out the door to another organization that will provide them with that, and you're going to lose them real quick. Yeah, and as we know, the financial cost of re-recruiting with a delay, because you're going to lose that person, you're going to have a gap in your inventory, if you want, in your workforce. It's going to cost you, and it'd be better to nurture, to spend some of that money, making sure that your leaders understand what Matt Tenney says, which is that their key responsibility is to create engagement.
Yeah. So I find the interesting piece is the companies only spend about $1,300 a year in developing talent on average. Here it is that it costs you 50 to 200% to recruit a new person who to fill a vacancy, plus the cost of the vacancy. And so you say, is if I could teach my leaders the skills of being great career coaches and talent managers, and how to ensure that I'm providing my highest and best use as a team leader, which is not managing stuff, because we're going to talk about but it's building capacity, as you like to say, of my individual, building their capability to grow, then that cost of replacement, which you now might take as the cost of doing business, is now moved to an investment that reaps multiple benefits in terms of engagement and profit and loyalty and sales growth and profit growth, all proven over decades. So I think both you and I both feel extremely passionate about why developing leaders and giving them wisdom from that, what really drives intention and is so important these days.
As you know, I spend some of my time doing sort of youth development with an outreach project, and therefore, despite the fact I'm now 58, I do work with young people in their teens, which is, it's great. It kind of keeps you on your toes, and it keeps you connected to a younger part of society than perhaps I would. The one thing I notice that's different, the most different about them as a group, and when I think back to me and my mates back in the 80s when I was at school, is there is a greater emphasis on democracy, collectiveness, and maybe kindness. It's kind of an overused word, but they seem reluctant to take over and be the boss or be the leader in a classic sense. They're far more likely, and this is my experience in London, in a particular bit of London, they tend to be a lot more encouraging and positive of each other in a way that I don't remember that back amongst my group of friends back in the 80s, where we could be pretty vicious with each other, actually, in terms of humor and stuff. That's not there. And I think that may be an aspect of that needs to be thought through at work as well.
My hypothesis and theory is that hierarchical organizational structures that were built from the Industrial Revolution, that came from that, where we have the army, we talked about the war, and we had the Industrial Revolution, and it was command and control, and everyone follows. We've gone to a new place where centralized command and control isn't the most effective way to lead a team of teams. And so democratization and empowerment and our ability to communicate and cross-communicate and the agility of all of that is what separates, I think, the new companies from what we'll call declining companies who still believe hierarchical command and control is the only way to run the business.
Yeah, I would distinguish between leadership through expertise, which is where the boss knows the answer and tells everyone what to do. And that can work, particularly if the boss is a genuine expert and no one else knows what to do, then clearly that would work. But in modern contemporary businesses, it's often the other way round. In other words, the boss can't lead through expertise. They have to lead through facilitation. In other words, the knowledge is actually on the coalface. It's at the coalface. It's amongst the more junior people who are more technically savvy or closer to the market or whatever it is. So what does that leave the boss left to do? Well, that still needs pulling together. It still needs facilitating. And therefore, relying on the out-of-date expertise that you brought with you into the job is not going to be a good thing. And I see too many leaders who have failed to evolve from being an expert, which they were once when they were an individual contributor. But that's almost like their prop. That's their kind of like, this is the thing that justifies my existence. They then become a boss and they're still relying on the same thing to justify their existence. And it's like, that's not working anymore.
No. Let's go back into some technique and tools. I want to cover two on this episode, which is you've created a 3-mode model where we talk about doer model, manager model, leader model. Why don't you talk about what is that model, why it's so important in terms of increasing team effectiveness and what it means to team leaders?
So just as with the CAP model around team effectiveness, the 3 modes model came about by just looking at the organizations that we work with and trying to distill down what's really going on here and how can we present that back to people in the simplest possible graphical way, because all of our clients are real busy. Yeah. So the CAB model came about by saying, well, what is it that goes wrong with teams and how would you fix it? What are the 3 priorities? The 3 modes model came about by looking at what is it that's going wrong with leadership and how can we explain that as simply as possible? And it really came about because we were being asked pretty much the same question by multiple different clients. And the question would be inevitably worded in different ways, but fundamentally it went, Sean, why won't our managers lead? Yeah.
Why won't our
managers lead? And it was like, well, what do you mean by managers and what do you mean by leadership? And if they're not leading, then what are they doing?
Right.
And we ended up synthesizing this and created the 3 modes model. And the 3 modes model basically says all of us, doesn't matter what we do for a living, you can be the chief executive or you can be the most junior person in the hierarchy doing some other job. We all spend our time working across 3 modes of operation. All right. So the bottom one on the graphic is operator mode. And this is you with your sleeves rolled up doing stuff, whatever it is that you do. Okay. So if you're a marketing person, a marketer, you're doing some marketing. All right. If you're a salesperson, you're selling. If you're an engineer, you're actually doing some engineering. I guess for me, it would be coaching or mentoring or facilitating a program. I'm actually out there doing the thing. That's that model. And we all love it. We're good at it. We've been doing it for a long time. We get incredible dopamine hits regularly from doing it. It makes us feel good. And that's the problem. Then what happens is occasionally we have to work in what we would call manager mode. It doesn't necessarily mean you are a manager. So, for example, a receptionist at the front desk of an organization, if you still have such a thing, and there are still companies that have that, at operator mode, they are looking up when you walk through the door, smiling, greeting you, making sure you're in the right place. That's them being a professional receptionist. However, they will do some managerial stuff, like they might need to keep a record of something. There might be some spreadsheet or some IT system that they need to enter stuff into. They might have a small budget for teas and coffees or something. It's that kind of administrative managerial stuff that just makes an organization tick. It's the discipline of an organization. So for me, I have to invoice people. I have to keep tabs on who's paid me and who hasn't. That's managerial. Yeah. The other bit of managerial is when you get to dispense advice and wisdom to other people about how to do their jobs, whether because you're their boss or maybe you just got more expertise and more experience than them. And most of us like that bit. Yeah. Now, what we observed was there's a lot of so-called leaders who are only operating at operator mode. So they're highly paid, and yet they spend a lot of time doing stuff.
Yeah.
Instead of delegating it and empowering it to others, because they're getting the dopamine hits. Or they're spending time doing management, which is budgets, it's plans, it's reports, it's dashboards, it's all of that stuff. And some people love that as well, by the way. In your company, if you send out an email, a request for people to fill in a spreadsheet or send you back a report, who's going to send it back really quickly, and who's going to have to be told 10 times. It's the same people every time.
Same time.
So some people like management, some people don't. So it's like, well, what are they not doing? What's the next level? And we call it leader mode. And we've tried to summarize leadership in 3 statements, which is an incredibly ambitious thing to do, but they're very broad statements. So we figured that one thing that leaders should do is connect other people with the big picture, connect themselves and other people with the big picture, with the external environment. When you're in operator mode, it's very easy to get sucked into doing stuff. What leadership mode is about is remembering why you're doing it and checking that that's still valid. So the first bit of leader mode is that whole clarity piece. It's about making sure that yourself, your team, your department are real focused on the big picture. And it's very easy to lose sight of that. The next one is building capability, and that's building your own capability. It's building capability of those that work for you or that you work with. It's building the capability of your team and contributing to the growth of the capability of your organization. So it's quite a long-term game that we're playing here. The dopamine hits don't come very quickly, which is why operator mode is so much more fun.
Yeah.
And then the third box, which is, if I was honest, it should say, and everything else, but we can't put that. So we have to put creating the conditions for success. And this is about how people in leader mode, and it doesn't matter what job you do, it's about how you show up. It's about how you behave, how you talk, what you say, whether you say it, how you say it, the impact that you have on others, whether you're engaging people at a heart's level as well as a mind's level. And there are just some people who do it naturally.
Yeah.
I think there really are. I think there are other people who don't ever do it. In fact, they have the opposite effect on people. And there are some of us who frankly are a bit pedestrian like me, who've had to learn how to do it and didn't even know it was a thing and didn't know it was important.
Yeah.
And to cycle back then to that question, the killer question is, Sean, why won't our managers lead? And I think what those people are saying is, we've got people in highly paid leadership positions who spend all of their time doing stuff and managing stuff that aren't doing this magical leadership thing. And the 3 modes model was designed to capture that in one page on one graphic and say, is this what you mean? And I think that model has been around for like 10 years ago. And every time we get it out and say, is this what you mean? Everyone says, hell yes, that's exactly what we're talking about.
And the nice part I've seen from is that people can say, oh yeah, I'm stuck down here and I really need to develop my capacity development ability. I need to understand and remind myself and be aware of it all. I want to do 2 things in this episode. I want to talk about the 4 types of leadership and then the 2 outside liars. We have, we're directing, coaching, mentoring, and empowering. This ability to give up. And then the 2 ends that you talk about where I'm completely disconnected. I don't pay any attention as the leader, or I'm just took over, because I think it ties back to your modes model. So let's do the interrelationship of how helping leaders be aware of what type of leadership style to be deploying as part of staying in the right level of the leadership mode model.
Yeah. So the 3 modes model helps people to understand that leadership is different from management, which is different from operator. And most people look at it and exactly as you say, they kind of, I need to spend more time up in this leader mode thing, this space, but it's tough. It's real difficult. So help me with that. So then maybe where we'll go next is to say, well, one of the ways you're going to improve your leadership practice is to be aware that you need to have different leadership styles, and you need to be better at some of those. And one of them will come naturally to you, and the chances are you overuse it. If all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, actually, if you're a construction worker or a home DIY, do-it-yourself enthusiast, you have a toolkit with a whole bunch of tools, no different to being a leader. And the fact that you prefer the hammer is not an excuse for going around using it all the time. So we distinguish between 6 different leadership styles. 2 of them we don't recommend. 4 of them, I'm afraid, we do recommend, and you're going to need to get better at all 4. So the 2 we don't recommend is give it here, I'll do it anyway, which is operator mode, isn't it? It's like, the only way I can be sure that this is going to work perfectly is if I do it. The people that do that a lot also complain they're real busy. I don't know if you've noticed that.
Yes, I have.
There might be a reason for that.
So busy.
At the other end of the spectrum is people who say, I'm your boss, but you'll only hear from me if it goes wrong. It's like the absence of leadership. And it's like, great, the only relationship I'm going to have with my boss is if something goes wrong. If everything's going fine, I'm never going to hear from you. Thanks for that. Then we've got the 4 in the middle. And we tend to sort of recommend that as you work with somebody and that person gains in confidence and competence, you change your leadership style. You change the style that you lead them. So you start off by directing them. You're going to tell them what to do and how to do it, because they don't know. They need to know. But then after a while, you go, okay, I'm going to be more advisory now. I'm going to mentor you. So the word mentoring we would use to mean you know more than they do. You give them advice. That doesn't mean to say you're not open to a discussion. You're not directing them. It's not like a series of bullet point instructions, but it's more of a conversation. But fundamentally, you still kind of want them to do it your way. There's a really interesting tipping point where you stop mentoring them as much and you start coaching them. And we use the word coaching to mean asking someone questions to help them think it through. So you're still there, you're still supporting them, you're still helping them, but you're not feeding them the answers. You're saying, hey, what do you want to do? What have you thought of? What are your options? Now, if they come up with some really scary options that you don't like, and you're like, well, I don't really want to, you can always flip back into mentoring and go, can I give you a bit of advice? Actually, in this company or in this team or in this instance, I really want you to do it this way. But hopefully they're going to come up with some great ideas, and you can encourage them to go and implement one of those ideas. And by the way, that means that coaching isn't an hour-long session with a sign up saying coaching in progress. This is just a conversational style. Right. It can take 2 minutes.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
It's a conversational style.
Yes.
And then But then the final style is what we would call empowerment or empowered delegation. And this is where you are releasing control and empowering and giving the power to someone else, but you still have a role to play. And I think this is where this goes wrong. A lot of people go on training or they read a book or whatever, and they realize they need to be less controlling. They need to be more empowering. And they misunderstand that. They think it means, I'm just going to give you the freedom. And it's like taking someone that can't swim to the deep end of the pool and going, I am going to empower you to swim. Bang. And it's like, that ain't the way to teach someone to swim, right? You still have a role. And I think we spend a lot of time helping leaders to overcome their natural fear, the control freakery that is inspired by that fear, and helping them to empower and delegate more, but empowering without fear. And it's how can you retain a degree of control would be too strong, a degree of influence, to build in some safety nets, to build in for your own sake more than for the other person. They probably are happy to do what they're going to do, but for your own sanity, given that you're the boss and ultimately you're accountable, how do you delegate and empower, but in a way that isn't like a fire and forget missile? Once you've done it, there's no getting it back. And we spend a lot of time doing that.
So what's coming to me is, as a young leader, and many leaders have this D style, right? Very driven, very directive. And I was that as a young leader.
Me too.
Do this, get it done. And then you notice it, and then at some point it's okay, well, you do it. And then I walked away because I didn't understand what coaching was. And coaching is a true art. I mean, the number of books and skills of the power of the question. That I think that's, if there's one thing for anybody listening to understand, great leaders ask great questions. As you said, a coaching conversation could be just 1 minute. It's the question versus the response. And I think it's hard for those like myself. It was really hard to so directive to take a breath, ask the question. And then the third piece is I let you go, but I don't go away. I stay within the guidelines and we do appropriate check-ins and drop-ins to make sure. I think that's why it's so important to know yourself. If you're a directive like I was, you might have a really hard time, as I did, in this aspect. So I'm glad that you work on all that. And I think our advice to everyone is you have to know where you're starting from to build your capacity, to build your skills, to be effective, and to just be wise. I think the leaders, because I think this kind of, I want you to close on this point for us. In this session, we covered so much, but if you had to summarize 18 years of experience for senior executives and new to the role of manager or new to the role of team leader, what advice do you have for being a great team leader?
3 pieces of advice. One is, if you lead a team and you want the team to be better, there are 3 levers that you should probably try and pull to improve things. There are other levers, but those 3 are going to give you, most of what you want. That's clarity, alignment, and behavior. Okay. Secondly, in terms of your own leadership practice, try to self-manage yourself out of operator mode, doing stuff yourself. Don't confuse management for leadership. Okay. Management is necessary. We need it. And the bigger the organization, unfortunately, the more management you need to do. But engage with, invest in, find out about what true leadership is. And that's not the same as managing people. It's much more people-centric. The third piece of advice would be actually to read Matt Tenney's book, Inspire Greatness, because I think, it's new out a few weeks ago, but I think what Matt does really nicely is to simplify a key message about leadership. And he says that the outcome of leadership is engagement. In other words, if you are a leader, or if you're seeking to lead, you have a very clear objective, which is quite nice because in the world of leadership, things tend to get really complicated. And he goes, no, this isn't going to help us. Your role, your outcome as a leader is to create engagement. And if you're creating engagement in the hearts and minds of others, you're doing a great job as a leader. If you're not, then you need to look at why not and how to do that. And I would say that, and I've read many books, the same as you have about this subject over the years, and there is no book that I've read that has so quickly led to a change in my own understanding and my own practice. So those are the 3 pieces of advice I would offer anybody who's interested in this subject.
And I love those 3 pieces of advice. And because you and I both met Matt at approximately the same time, he inspired me to bring up the word to look for the magnificence within each person, right? If we can find and inspire each person to be great, as he likes to say, inspire greatness, help them grow in their skills and talents and capacity and capabilities to accomplish their dreams and find their strengths and let it be unleashed in the organization, you get engagement. And so this human centricity of leadership, I think, is what we're coming to and what the generations behind us are looking for from the leaders of today. So,
Absolutely.
Sean, I am so grateful that we got to spend so much time together. I am incredibly grateful for our relationship, our friendship, our mentorship, your coaching, your commitment, and I have the highest respect for you. And I thank you for being my guest on this episode of Trailblazing Leaders. So thank
Russell,
you.
it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome. In this second episode with Sean, we talked a lot about the aspect of the 3 leadership mode model, what he calls the doer mode, the manager mode, the leadership mode, how often leaders fall into the doer mode because it gives them the dopamine hits. We talked a lot about that management is an activity, but it is not leadership. And the role of leadership is to build capacity and inspire others. And when you're a leader, we also talked about the 4 types of leadership models in terms of directing, mentoring, coaching, and empowering, and that how we have to help our team members go through that, and that we need to be agile in the style we're using depending upon the circumstance and situation. And of course, as new people enter, we're doing a lot of mentoring. As they get stronger, we're starting to do coaching. But coaching doesn't have to be a 1-hour session. It could be just a simple, powerful question. And eventually we want to empower them because we've built capacity in them and let them feel that they can fly freely, but always maintain some sort of check and balance. So we're just not extracting ourselves and therefore discounting the value of an individual to an organization. The third piece we covered a lot about is the trends within the generations, the misperceptions of the generational differences, and what is required of leadership, of team leaders today, given these generational differences, which still comes back to meeting their core 12 needs defined by Gallup. And the single most important need is helping to develop their career skills, develop and manage their talent so they can eventually achieve their personal goals and aspirations. And that's what creates engagement. The final piece in this episode we talked about was, well, what is the essence of team leadership? It is really inspiring greatness, because when you're inspiring greatness, as Matt Tenney says, you're maximizing engagement. And when you maximize engagement, that your company gains a tremendous amount of competitive advantage versus a low engagement organization. So I want to thank Sean for being my guest. Our special gift is our Magnificent Manager Advantage Guide and other materials. They have several of Sean's tools integrated into them as part of our programming that we offer. So I encourage you to go to kernandpartners.com and be able to download the tools and guide and content that we spoke about today. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Trailblazing Leaders podcast. If you want to check out more episodes, you're going to find them on all major streaming platforms such as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and of course, YouTube. The podcast is also available at our website at kernandpartners.com. Thank you for being with us today, and we'll see you on our next episode.